Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
With just one more full day to go until the general election, the party leaders have been out campaigning across the country. Since Saturday's attack, the campaign has been dominated by the issue of security. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg has been looking at how that's affecting a campaign that has seen not one but two terror attacks.
A spot of rain after 7 weeks on the road, not enough to put them off. Has everyone got one? Placards at the ready as the PM was about to arrive. But the subject is serious. Security after the London attacks.
Morning, Prime Minister.
Who do you trust to maintain your national security? Somebody who has boasted that he has opposed every piece of anti-terror legislation since he came into Parliament? Or me and the Conservatives? As Home Secretary, I put through strengthened anti-terror legislation.
Do you fear, as many members of the public might do, that there were intelligence failures in this case? Or do we have to accept in 2017 that no matter how hard we try, some terrorists may slip through?
The Police and Security Service have done a good job in foiling a number of plots, just 5 in the last 3 months, and a significant number since in the last few years. They will want to learn lessons for the future, if there are those lessons to be learned. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
With repeated questions on her record, security could be a hindrance as well as a political help.
We have the Tory party having to ask very serious questions about whether or not their security approach was good enough.
And we've answered those questions.
I think people feel a lot safer in their beds supporting Theresa May. I certainly do.
For all this looks like a traditional election campaign,
There we go. Thank you.
it has been anything but. 2 terror attacks disrupting the oh-so-casual conversations, the smiles for the cameras. But that hasn't dimmed the Corbyn crowd's enthusiasm.
Jeremy Corbyn is cheered to the rafters almost everywhere he goes. But just as Theresa May faces questions about her security record, he too is under pressure.
Everywhere we go, the crowds get bigger.
Yet how would Labour plan to combat terror?
I'm worried if they haven't got the resources they need to do the job, and obviously there's got to be a report on both Manchester and on London as to what level of information was available on those people, and then decide if more resources are necessary in order to prevent this sort of thing happening again.
You can't cut 20,000 policemen off the beat and expect the same security you have before they've been cut. That's just not possible.
It's like the ideological approach that Theresa May is taking, that we have to kind of police people's minds. It really is about numbers of people on the ground.
I think we need to just look after each other, love one another. I think that's more important.
A stridently different tone from UKIP.
Islamist extremism is a cancer within our society, and it is a cancer that needs to be cut out.
Also on the back foot in the campaign, the Lib Dems urging caution.
Sadly, we discovered that those people guilty of the pathetic, cowardly murders in Manchester and London in the last fortnight are people who are known to the security services. The question is not intelligence and new powers, it's having the resources to be able to keep us safe.
Security, the one issue that matters in every corner of the country.
We have an opportunity in Scotland to send a real message about the kind of country we want to be. Theresa May's on the ropes in this election. It's no longer inevitable that she'll get a bigger majority. Events
mean this election has not gone according to her carefully worked out plan. In an election that, after all, she didn't have to call. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Telford.
So, security may be dominating the closing stages of the election campaign, but overall it's been the economy, the NHS and Brexit that have divided the parties. So where do each of the parties stand? In a moment we'll hear from our health editor Hugh Pym and our Europe editor Katya Adler. But first, here's our economics editor Kamal Ahmed.
Whether you're a voter out shopping or battling to be the next Prime Minister, there are three big economic challenges that are pretty familiar. That living standards squeeze, the state of the public finances, and that Brexit deal. The parties have laid out pretty different approaches, but there is one central promise from all of them. They will balance the books, they say, when it comes to government financing. The Conservatives say that only they can provide the foundations for a strong economy, for enhanced workers' rights and a good Brexit deal. But critics say that a Theresa May win would only lead to harsher levels of austerity for longer. For Labour, the talk is all about a fairer economy. Fewer cuts, more public investment. Yes, they say that borrowing would rise and there would be higher taxes for the wealthy and for business. When it comes to the EU, they say they want a close relationship. The big challenge, do their sums add up? Now, for the Liberal Democrats, they have also pledged an increase in income tax and have said they will reverse those public sector pay freezes. For the SNP, they want higher taxes for the wealthy and more investment in those public services. Whoever we vote for on Thursday, the economic challenges will remain. Economic growth is slowing, prices are going up. Quite frankly, there are no easy political fixes.
The election debate on the NHS is largely about England. Health is devolved, and the administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland don't have elections this time. Money is the dominant issue. How much more will be needed to cope with rising patient demand and the complex health needs of an ageing population? The Conservatives say they'll spend a bit more than under current plans. Labour and the Liberal Democrats are planning bigger funding increases paid for by specific tax rises. But some health think tanks say none of them have come up with enough. Staffing and recruitment is another major challenge. Labour and the Liberal Democrats both say they'd end pay restraint to allow bigger pay rises for NHS staff. The Conservatives want to see thousands more mental health staff recruited. As for social care, the debate's been dominated by a row over how much people should have to pay to be looked after in a care home or for carers to go to where they live, and how much of the bill the state should pick up. Longer term, in varying degrees, the larger parties have all called for greater health and social care integration. Well, that's fine in theory, but it certainly won't be easy to deliver.
Brexit will be a huge issue for whoever ends up in here. One of their first jobs will be to appoint a chief Brexit negotiator, pack them off to Brussels and get them to agree with the EU how often they'll meet, what they'll talk about and in which order before real negotiations can begin. And the new government will be under big time pressure because under EU rules it only has until March 2019 to agree an exit deal, never mind a future relationship, trade or otherwise, between the UK and the EU. The larger parties differ considerably in their approach to Brexit. Theresa May promises to be a bloody difficult woman. The Conservatives want out of the European single market and out of the customs union, whereas Labour wants to retain the benefits of the single market and customs union, though it wants to curb European immigration. The Liberal Democrats insist that the Brexit deal must be put to a popular vote, whereas the SNP wants a new independence referendum so Scotland can stay inside the EU. And UKIP has been campaigning on a promise to hold the new government to account over Brexit. Whatever happens in these elections, the new Prime Minister and government will largely be judged on what kind of a Brexit deal they can get and what impact it has on lives here.
With just a little over 36 hours to go until polls open for the general election, the main party leaders have been cramming in as much campaigning as they possibly can. Theresa May was keen to put into focus back on leadership. Jeremy Corbyn continued to pull in the crowds, and Tim Farron called on a friend for help. Political correspondent Romilly Weeks on the last-minute push for votes.
Theresa May and her battle bus were squeezing in every last possible campaign stop today. Even this farm in North Wales got a look in. Determined to give the impression the air hasn't left the Tory campaign, after the row over police cuts at her first rally of the day, she was on the defensive over security.
Who do you trust to maintain your national security? Somebody who has boasted that he has opposed every piece of anti-terror legislation since he came into Parliament. Or me and the Conservatives. As Home Secretary, I put through strengthened anti-terror legislation.
Jeremy Corbyn has shown that he can draw large crowds throughout this campaign, although largely in safe Labour seats. Today, though, he risked a marginal constituency, Telford. His supporters boosted by the feeling that their man, once written off, is the one with momentum.
We're nearly the end of this election campaign, and we've done dozens and dozens of events all over the country. And you know what? Everywhere we go, the crowds get bigger. People are determined to show that this election can be won by Labour, but we're also offering something very different to the Conservatives. We're offering hope, they're offering something else.
And do they work, you work 24 hours a day, or what's it going to be?
Maybe not 24/7, but Tim Farron has been putting in the shifts himself. Today, Nick Clegg, though, was drafted in to give their campaign a bit more welly, amid signs that the Lib Dems' anti-Brexit message is falling flat.
The Liberal Democrats standing alone and holding the government to account is something which I think, first of all, I'm very proud of. It's what I think it's right, and history will judge us well. And in the months to come, I'm convinced we'll be proved right.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Labour is holding 6 simultaneous rallies in England, Scotland and Wales this evening. Jeremy Corbyn will be basking in the endorsement of the likes of Steve Coogan. Theresa May, for her part, was not missing a chance to look prime ministerial. Whether she gets 5 more years with that red box, we'll know very soon. Romilly Weeks, ITV News, Westminster.
Welcome now to Aberdeen, where with less than 36 hours to go before the polls open on Thursday, the political temperature is rising. I'm at the aptly named Number 10 Bar and Restaurant. I've spent the day getting the views of local people and speaking to the SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon. But first, let's look at the UK-wide picture, which has been dominated over these closing days by those issues of security in the wake of both Manchester and the London Bridge attack. The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is in Birmingham this evening, where he's due to address a rally within the next few minutes. Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, is there, and Mr Corbyn's speech is being beamed live to similar events around Britain. Michael.
Yes, well, John, right now here in Birmingham, the crowd are listening to the comedian and big Labour supporter Steve Coogan. Big cheers from there. A few moments ago, he described Boris Johnson as the Tories' upper-class twit, the Tories' clown, and he said, though, that Mr Johnson wasn't that funny. As you were saying, this rally here, and goodness knows how many of the people there are, I suppose at least 1,000 people here, is being beamed to 5 other Labour rallies around the country in Barry, in South Wales, Brighton, Glasgow, London, Warrington in Cheshire, and at each of those rallies are leading Labour politicians, candidates, first-time voters and Labour celebs such as Ben Elton and Maxine Peake, the actress. So Labour in many ways a much more sort of old-fashioned traditional type of rally here. And I think one of the interesting features of this campaign is the huge crowds that Jeremy Corbyn has managed to generate. Last night in Gateshead, there were many thousand people listening to him there. I'd say, in fact, Jeremy Corbyn is probably getting bigger crowds at his events in this campaign than any party leader, probably since Winston Churchill. Whether that'll translate into votes or not, who knows? Now, earlier today, I was following the other side of the campaign, the Conservatives, and in particular went along to watch Boris Johnson in Bishop Auckland up in the northeast.
The Foreign Secretary's visit to County Durham today was met by supporters of the local Labour Party. But that didn't stop Boris Johnson delivering a fierce attack on Jeremy Corbyn.
For 30 years, he has been soft and muddle-headed on terror. He has been soft and muddle-headed on defence. He has taken the side of just about every adversary this country has had in my lifetime. From the IRA to Hamas, from Soviet communism to General Galtieri, for heaven's sake.
What did people think on the nearby streets?
Who do you think's better suited to protect us from terrorism? Conservatives or Labour? Corbyn or May?
Well, it must be May. Anybody voting for Corbyn, there's something the matter with them.
Really?
You are. Wait, do you want to go back to the 1970s?
Well, considering the problems supposedly caused by May when she was Home Secretary, I have my doubts. Because apparently she was going to do all this to stop immigration, and also she dropped the control orders.
So who's better suited for dealing with terrorism?
Well, Theresa May, she's a strong lady, and I think she'll put the country right if they give her time.
I think Corbyn.
Corbyn?
I do.
Why?
I don't like her at all.
You don't like her?
I don't.
What do you think about the particular terrorism issue? Do you think Corbyn's better for that?
Well, I wouldn't know. But I just don't like. She says one thing and means another. When she goes back on her tracks.
18 months ago, David Cameron commissioned a government report on the money behind terrorist groups. But it's not yet seen the light of day.
Mr Johnson, why has your government suppressed this report on the funding of terrorist groups, which apparently points the finger hugely at the Saudis? Isn't it better for you, in the current climate, to confront the Saudis about this rather than cozying up to them?
Well, I think you're making a valid point about the funding. I mean, I can't comment on any confidential report, but you're making a valid point.
Well, publish it.
The role of the other countries, governments or not, in funding, wittingly or not, in funding groups that may be responsible for terrorism, and in funding mosques where all sorts of hate-filled nonsense is being spouted, and we've got to stop that.
And publish this report.
I'm not going to comment on confidential reports.
But you're suppressing it, aren't you?
No, but we have plenty of stuff, Michael, that we don't publish. I will dig it out and have a look at it if that's what you would like me to do. But as far as I know, we do not have the confidential report of the kind that you describe. But you need a strong and dynamic security response, and that cannot be led by somebody who is viscerally, congenitally opposed to shoot to kill, and a Home Secretary, as I say, and I belabor the point, in the form of Diane Abbott, who has tried to block every piece of counter-terrorist legislation for the last 35 years.
Ms Abbott herself cancelled doing Woman's Hour today and another big public event, saying she was unwell after last night, where she seemed unsure what was in Lord Harris's report on police readiness for terrorism.
Have you actually read the report?
I have.
Okay, what about when you talk about, what about the physical resilience? Again, I'm referring to this because it seemed prescient.
Yes, I mean, I think physical resilience is important. I think that...
But there was a specific aspect of physical resilience.
Well, I think that physical resilience is important.
Yes, well, I mean, but the specific aspect was he talked about putting up more barriers in the light of the Nice attacks. He mentioned that in October 2016.
Yes, we're now putting up barriers on bridges. And you'd think we might have done that before, particularly after what happened on Westminster Bridge.
Meanwhile, the former Lib Dem leader Nick Clegg accused the two main leaders of avoiding the main issue of the campaign.
The truth is that there has been a pact of silence on Brexit between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn. It is one of the most cynical acts of political collusion between the two larger parties in a generation, and it has made a mockery of Theresa May's insistence that this is a general election about Brexit.
Both May and Corbyn are stepping up the pace. She visited a farm in North Wales and a cafe in Lancashire, among other places.
This is the story of the campaign trail, half-drunk cups of coffee.
While Jeremy Corbyn this afternoon addressed another Labour rally in Telford in Shropshire.
Michael Crick. Well, now, Theresa May has also been touring the country throughout the day. She's now made it as far as Slough this evening. She's speaking even now and on her feet she will eventually end up in London, where our political editor Gary Gibbon joins us now from Westminster. Gary, what's Theresa May had to say this evening?
Well, what she's about to say, I understand, is that while she's not going to, she says, announce policy 2 days before the general election, that would be wrong, she says. Nonetheless, in reaction to the latest attacks, the weekend attacks at Borough Market, she's going to repeat that she's interested in looking again at whether there need to be tougher sentences for, at the moment, things that are characterised as less serious offences, and also whether she needs to have more powers to deport people who are terrorist suspects, and also whether there needs to be more restriction of movement on people who are suspected of terrorist activity, but in cases where there isn't enough evidence to prosecute. Now, she's said some of this before, but what she's going to layer on top of it, I understand, is a very interesting remark. She's going to say that if any of that requires, if the human rights laws get in the way, she will change them. Now, that is fairly extraordinary, really, because it's in the Conservative manifesto that the human rights laws are going to stay as they are right up until the end of the Brexit negotiations, when they might be revisited. She stood for the leadership of the Conservative Party, saying she wouldn't withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights. So it sounds a little bit as though she is changing the ground on which she only very recently stood. Now, I suspect she would say, well, circumstances have changed. But I suspect that the opposition, Labour in particular perhaps, and the Lib Dems might turn around, amongst others, and say, well, you're just panicking and trying to say that you're going to change things, and you may not even change them. There is a big caveat in what I understand Theresa May is going to say. She does say if it requires changes in human rights law. But nonetheless, this is a fairly odd thing to be doing, as she says herself, just 2 days from the general election.
Gary, thank you from Westminster. We're here in the appropriately named number 10 and are joined now by one of Scotland's most eminent cultural figures, the crime writer and independence campaigner Val McDermott, and by the new Lord Provost of Aberdeen, Barney Crockett, who's also the former Labour leader of Aberdeen City Council. He opposes independence. But I'm going to ask the same question to both of you, because to somebody coming up from the south looking at this contest up here, it's impossible to pinpoint what it's actually about. I mean, what is this election about in Scotland? It doesn't seem actually to be about independence.
I'll tell you, that's absolutely what it's not about. The Tories would like to think it's about independence, and all the Tory election literature is about Ruth Davidson and No Indy too. But actually, it's really not about that at all. I think it's about austerity. And the policies of the Scottish Government, since we've had a Scottish Parliament, have essentially been anti-austerity and pro a kind of social democracy. And I think that's a much more solid way forward than the Tories' method of cutting everything, making everybody miserable, and depriving the poor, the old and the disabled of their needs.
So what's it about from your perspective?
Well, I think that, as Mrs May is discovering, elections aren't about what you want them to be about, and it's not about what I want it to be about. I would like the election to be about improving people's chances and moving their lives forward, improving education, improving social cohesion.
Well, none of that's been floating around.
I mean, to be honest and blunt, in this area, certainly, it is very largely about the referendum and people not wanting the referendum. If the Conservatives have the increase in votes that they seem to expect, then it will purely because they're only standing on one issue, which is no second referendum. That's what's in all the publicity, and that has fueled their rise to some degree in this area.
Hang on. So you're saying it's about independence, not wanting it, and you're saying minor issue at the moment.
I think it is. And the irony, the terrible irony is that with a strong Tory government in Westminster carrying forward the kind of cuts that they're talking about, I think that only strengthens the case for independence in Scotland. People have no idea how appalling Brexit is going to be for them. And 5 years of a Tory government and the Brexit that destroys our economy, I think will change people's minds quite dramatically.
But in truth, Mrs Sturgeon has actually been fighting shy of the independence issue and a second resolution. That didn't go terribly well in the beginning of her campaign. I mean, it's the sort of I word that doesn't like to speak itself as far as the SNP are concerned.
I think part of the difficulty is with this election being called, the Scots have actually got to the point where we're a bit fed up of voting. We've had more votes than we've had vegetables in the last few years.
I think that, again, it's perception. The people who were not in favour of independence, the big change we've seen in the last couple of years is they're now very strongly against the independence and against it being raised. And I think that there may be a phase where that's a very dominant feature of Scottish politics.
But the truth is that your opposition to independence has not in any way really assisted your party. I mean, it's the Tories that are prospering from being anti-independence.
Well, I think across Europe you're seeing the polarisation of society making life very difficult for my own sort of politics. The moderate centre-left politics tends to be marginalised, and we're seeing that to some degree in Scotland. But I think the message of say Mr Corbyn is beginning to get through. You're seeing that. You're seeing a rise in Labour support, certainly in Scotland. But yes, you're right. The polarisation is there. But it is, that whatever we want the election to be about, that is what some of the voters are voting on. And I think it will lead to some change at least.
But that is interesting. Do you not accept, given that the Tories were literally dead in Scotland, I mean dead and all but buried, it is interesting that the resistance to independence has regenerated them.
I think part of the issue has been Brexit. Labour alienated their core support so thoroughly during the Indie Ref. They didn't take a nuanced position. I think Scottish Labour could have taken a position where they said, you know what, you can vote for independence, but you're still within our fold. But they didn't do that. They got into bed with the Tories. Their core support really deserted them over that. And so people who are in support of Brexit in Scotland feel they have nowhere else to go but the Tories. I think that's a large part of it, rather than just the Indie Ref issue.
But I think that politicians have to be honest, and I think Labour was very honest about the independence referendum, that they didn't see it as, politically, socially, economically to the advantage.
But I haven't heard either of you talk about wagging the Westminster dog, which is what we're looking for. I mean, are you going to wag it for Tory or for Labour?
I have no idea. I think.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, I think, one possibility is that there's a return to almost stasis in the UK Parliament, but with some new MPs
Promise.
Who are not supporting.
Sadly, we've got to leave it there. Val McDermott, thank you both very much indeed. We'll be back tomorrow at 7, but for now, that's Channel 4 News. Our main headlines tonight involve the naming of a third individual who was responsible for the. Theresa May is on air from Slough. Let's hear a word or two right there.
If our human rights laws stop us from doing it, we'll change the laws so we can do it.
Welcome back to Aberdeen, where we are focusing on the final hours of the Scottish campaign that is far more about Brexit and potentially affecting the balance of Westminster than about independence, although that remains in many voters' minds both pro and anti. The SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon, has been campaigning here today. You'll see my interview with her in a moment. But first, I've been taking the temperature here in the Granite City. Wonderful weather for gulls, but even by Aberdeen standards, this has been an exceptionally wet day, all day. Hardly likely to ignite enthusiasm for this, the 4th Scotland-wide vote in just 3 years. In the tattoo parlour, the sheen seemed to be coming off the SNP for some.
Voted SNP before, yeah. Last time I voted SNP.
What's put you off them this time?
I don't know, if people have lost faith in Nicola, I feel, after the referendum and all that.
Because I've kind of lost faith in the whole system. I don't really know what I'm going to vote this time.
So you might not vote at all?
Probably not.
Oh, good to see you. Yeah.
The very sentiment that convinces Scottish Tory leader Ruth Davidson, in equally bedraggled Edinburgh, she could win votes for a softer, kinder Brexit.
We want to make sure we've got Conservatives working in there to get the right deal for Scotland. That means making sure that we come out of the hated common fisheries policy, we get the right deal as we reorganise our farm payments, and it also means we're working with the government from Scotland rather than having SNP MPs that just want to fight against them all the time.
Scottish Labour leader Kezia Dugdale, also in Edinburgh today, in these strange times is blessed with a new poll which puts Labour within 1% of the Tories. So she's talking money, more of it, in the areas where the SNP is vulnerable, health and education.
Jeremy Corbyn has been very clear the spending decisions that he's taking UK-wide would actually see Scotland's budget rise by £3 billion. That's £3 billion more for our schools and hospitals, and it's another reason to vote Labour on Thursday.
And then there are the Liberal Democrats. Their leader, Willie Rennie, talking safeguarding funding from Whitehall.
Yeah, it's a bit of a jumble. I think it's important that we have guaranteed funding streams for Scotland to maintain the quality of services that we've got in Scotland. We need to invest in education and mental health.
Escaping the weather in Aberdeen's Union Square shopping centre, I run into two women who emphasise the underlying threat to the SNP. So, are you going to be voting in the election?
Yeah, of course.
What decides you? What are the issues that worry you?
We don't want another referendum.
You don't want another referendum? Nice to meet you too. You don't want another referendum, so that means you don't vote SNP?
No.
So what do you have to vote?
Tory.
Tory?
Yeah, me too.
You voted for Tony Blair's Labour?
Yes.
But you haven't voted Labour since?
No, I'm going to vote Labour now.
So you went literally from left to right? From Labour to Tory?
Yeah, but not yeah, maybe, but mainly to stop another referendum.
Have you enjoyed this campaign? It's an odd one, isn't it?
Horrible.
Do you like Theresa May?
Yes.
Uh-huh. What do you like about her? Strong and stable?
Strong and stable. I like her shoes.
You like her shoes? Truth to tell, oil and gas drilling extraction still dominate the economy here. Consequently, this is a more small C, conservative area and could be fertile for the anti-independence parties. But the SNP is banking on the youth vote. Who will you vote for then if you're going to vote?
I'm not too sure yet.
It's between Labour and SNP for me.
Same, but I'm probably more likely to vote Labour.
Uh-huh. And you?
SNP, yeah. SNP probably.
Close by, a seasoned voter reviews the Scottish political leaders.
If you gave me a choice between Ruth Davidson, Willie Rennie or Kezia Dugdale, it's a no-brainer. I'm sorry, it's just a no-brainer.
It would be Sturgeon?
Absolutely, because...
What about Theresa May?
What about Theresa May?
The SNP tide may have reached its fullest, but amid the campaign storm such as it is, how critical Scotland's votes will prove is just one of this election's many uncertainties. Well, first thing this morning, before the day's campaigning began, I sat down to talk to the leader of the Scottish National Party, Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon, was it unwise to play the independence card so early in the campaign? Did you have to retreat from it?
I don't think I would describe it as playing a card. It's an issue of principle that, given the implications of Brexit, we don't know yet exactly what they are. I hope I'm wrong, but I think the approach to Brexit that the Prime Minister is taking, a very extreme form of Brexit, could be really, really damaging to our economy, our society, to almost every aspect of life. So my position is that at the end of that process, not now, but at the end of that process, Scotland must have a choice, once we know what the implications of Brexit are, to decide, is that right for the country, or do we want to take a different path?
But in this moment in which the election has been called, independence really has to, step back, because you're talking about a situation in which so much could happen to the Scottish economy even before you ever had another referendum.
Which is why I am not proposing a referendum now. My proposition is
But that's
at
not
the
how
end.
it sounded at the beginning. It sounded almost as if a vote this time will confirm that I need an early referendum.
I've always said at the end of the Brexit process, I think we should have that choice.
You do 4 times more trade with England than you do with the whole of Europe. So what happens on Brexit is a massive implication for you.
I don't think we should lose the ability to trade with the biggest single market in the world, which is 8 times the size of the UK market. And the Prime Minister and the government just now is at pains, and rightly so, let me say, to say to the Republic of Ireland that Brexit doesn't mean Ireland having to choose between trade with the UK and trade with the EU, and at pains to say there will be no hard borders between the north and the south. So if that's true for Ireland, then it doesn't make any logical sense to say to Scotland that somehow, if Scotland was to have a different relationship with Europe, that we wouldn't be able to trade with the UK.
If the polls not necessarily believable, but if they really do suggest a tightening, possibly even a minority Tory government, you might be called upon to prop it up. Now, what would the price be?
Well, I'm not in the business of propping up Tory governments in any sense. If the arithmetic after the election allowed this to happen, I would want the SNP to be part of a progressive alternative to a Tory government, an alternative that invested in public services rather than cut them, that protected pensions rather than undermine them.
Well, you've only got one other option, and that would be Labour. Would that be progressive enough for you?
Let me come on to that in a second. Even with the narrowing of the polls, I think it looks as if the Tories will win this election on the strength of what happens across the rest of the UK. But what is not inevitable anymore, in my judgment, is that Theresa May increases her majority. Remember, she called this election because she thought she could steamroller everybody aside, crush the opposition, and then she's showed herself to be the weakest and most evasive leader in living memory. But Scotland has the potential to keep a Tory government in check and make sure that Theresa May doesn't have a majority that is boosted on the strength of Scottish votes.
The big problem that you have is that you have 10 years in power at the Scottish Parliament, running Scotland so far as you have the devolved
I don't think
powers.
that's a problem, incidentally.
Well, except that take education, for example, the record is really very poor indeed. I mean, a loss of 4,000 teachers, a ranking on the international scale that is lower than Scotland has ever seen. That's not good, is it?
We have challenges in education, but we also have
But
on a number.
What are the challenges?
Well, let me come on to that in a second. But I also think it's important not to allow the Scottish education system to be trashed by people who want to talk down the SNP government.
But it used to be so much better than England. Much better.
We now have more young people coming out of school with good qualifications than ever before. We're seeing the gap between the richest and the poorest young people start to narrow. We've got more to do that. We have record numbers of Scottish young people now going into university, record numbers going into positive destinations, whether that's further education or training or work, than ever before.
I'm looking at graphs here in the FT that show student performance in maths are literally going from a very high level and crossing over with England going up and you going down. And the same true in performances in science. Terrible figures.
I'm not denying we've got challenges. That's why I was about to tell you the various initiatives we're taking to address those challenges. I think in government...
But in part you're going to be elected on the basis of your record.
This is the point here. I think it is absolutely right to hold the Scottish Government to account. But Thursday we'll see MPs elected that will go to the House of Commons to vote on public spending, whether the money we have available to us to invest in schools and hospitals goes up or down, to vote on issues like welfare, the decisions that will determine whether or not 1 million more children across the UK are plunged into poverty, something that will make it harder for any government in the UK to raise educational attainment. So these are the issues people are voting on, and the choice for Scotland, we know the Tories want to have further cuts. Do we want MPs that will support that, or do we want MPs that will argue for an alternative to that?
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you very much
for
talking with us.
I've been getting away